Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandra Park BJJ. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a full-contact martial art and combat sport that was developed in Brazil in the 20th century. With roots in Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, has been developed and refined into a unique grappling art with the aim to allow a smaller and weaker individual to beat a bigger and stronger opponent with the application of proper technique. Based in Muswell Hill, North London, Alexandra Park BJJ's classes are designed so that you can develop your fitness levels, balance, coordination and flexibility in a no-pressure environment, and to provide the opportunity to start a new sport at a reasonable price. At Alexandra Park BJJ, we aim to be inclusive so that everyone can benefit from this incredible art, not just the athletic or ultra-competitive. To book your free class, head over to alexandraparkbjj.co.uk or email inquiries at alexandraparkbjj.co.uk.
Welcome to Audiobookish, an audiobook review and discussion podcast looking at audiobooks both big and small, as well as radio plays, narrative podcasts, anything audiobook-ish. This podcast may contain spoilers, rants, curse words, mispronunciations of names and places, and more.
Hello everybody, you're listening to Audiobookish. My name is Fahed Rahman, and as always I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we're discussing the final two books on the Week Junior Book Awards shortlist for the Children's Audiobook of the Year. And we'll be discussing Spaceboy by David Walliams and Real Pigeons, books 1 to 3 by Andrew McDonald and Ben Wood. The first of those titles we're going to be reviewing is Spaceboy by David Walliams, as narrated by Akiya Henry, Reginald D. Hunter, Eric Meyers, Penelope Rawlins, Liza Ross, and by David Walliams. And I'll read out the blurb for that. America, the 1960s. Stuck on a remote farm with her awful aunt, 12-year-old orphan Ruth spends every night gazing at the stars, dreaming of adventure. One night, she spots a flying saucer blazing across the sky before crash landing in a field. When the spaceship opens and reveals a mysterious alien, all Ruth's dreams come true. But does this visitor from another planet have a giant secret? Okay, so what were your kind of initial impressions of this one, Poppy?
Yeah, so I'm not the biggest David Walliams fan or biggest fans of his books and stuff like that, so didn't expect that I'd love this, and maybe that's also coloured how I felt about it. And I thought it was okay, but didn't love it, and this one has got, as you saw there with the list of narrators, obviously it's got a big cast of lots of different voices. It definitely employs sound effects in there, you know, there's been a lot put into this. Sort of less like we've had for some where that's to make it immersive, and I think it's more just to kind of pack in the entertainment in there as much as possible, you know. It's all about the effects and the excitement and the intrigue and things like that, which I think overall is done quite well. I thought some of the voices were a bit annoying, potentially by design. So like the, you know, nasty grandma has a really horrible, annoying voice, but I think she's supposed to kind of thing. But yeah, even like Ruth's grated on me a little. But I have to say that David Walliams is a fantastic performer, and his narration parts are really well done and extremely engaging and stuff like that. So yeah, I think kind of initial/overall impressions is that I thought it was pretty good. I thought there was a lot of stuff put into it that really adds value to it, makes it a great audio experience. But yeah, not going to be one of my new absolute favourites. What about you?
I think I feel pretty similar, maybe slightly less positive. I think,
right.
Yeah, to start off with the positive aspects, I think the sound design in the book is absolutely fantastic. There's lots of musical flourishes, sound effects, stuff like that really do add to the story. And again, I agree with you, David Walliams, I think overall narrates the book really well. It's his material. He's a fantastic comic performer, but yeah, the story didn't really grab me kind of for some reason. So both this and, you know, the other book that we're going to be discussing, Real Pigeons, are kind of like, they use a lot of like silly humor and stuff like that. For some reason, the silly humor in Spaceboy didn't work as well as the silly humor in Real Pigeons, and kind of listening to them both so kind of like close together kind of really made that juxtaposition, that comparison quite obvious. Again, I think I would agree with you. Some of the vocal performances, you could kind of tell it was maybe like a British person putting on an American accent.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes you could kind of tell that was happening. But yeah, again, kind of, it was all right. I can't say it was like a bad book, but it didn't grab me like some of the other books on the short list that we've listened to.
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm not going to turn around and tell people they absolutely should not listen to this, it's terrible, or anything like that, not at all. But I'm also going to struggle to actively, like, recommend it. Like you say, the story isn't really grabbing. It didn't really have anything particular to it. I thought some of it, certainly later on, was quite predictable, as in like this big secret. It doesn't really feel like a big secret, I'll be honest, as you're listening to it. And I think if you want a kind of alien encounter story with a kid who's being looked after by someone who treats them nastily, then one of my favourite audiobooks, The Invisible Boy by Sally Gardner, is a much better example and a much better one for you to go for, in my personal opinion, than this. Yeah, there wasn't really much to the story that was particularly engaging, I don't think, or memorable, or potentially memorable in a bad way. So what was with the potential redemption arc for a Nazi doctor?
That was an odd
I'm
decision.
not so comfortable with that, I'll be honest. Was a very weird one. So yeah, story wasn't really great for me. The character performances I didn't really love, but part of that is just kind of like, I personally found them annoying, and a lot of people and maybe a lot of kids wouldn't. But yes, like you said, sound design, really fantastic. There were some particular parts that I thought were good. There was kind of when they show the alien a Welcome to Earth film, and it's kind of like an old actual film projector, you know, click, 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 click kind of thing, and fuzzy sounds and stuff like that I thought was really good. They put a sound effect on for Spaceboy, who has this helmet on that really kind of distorts the voice. And a bit like I'd said for Natural Wonders of the World, I think that crossed over into making it hard to understand, potentially, and certainly depending on how and when you're listening to it, through what speakers and things like that, maybe makes that a bit unaccessible and went a bit far. But overall, I did like how the sound effects were used. I don't think I really noted down, like I have with some others, that I felt a certain sound effect was jarring and didn't fit and stuff like that. It seems like it was done really well overall, and similarly a nice audiobook thing. I liked how there's a bit where it's examples of news headlines from the area, and they had different voices reading them out, so it really did feel like they'd been cut from newscasts across, you know, years. You know, they were all different examples all kind of spliced together that I thought was really good. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of good audio stuff in there to make it this exciting audiobook experience, but some of it may be in the style that doesn't appeal to me, and yeah, the story unfortunately not behind it to back it up.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit kind of about the story. Well, one of our main protagonists is Ruth. She's a young girl that lives in the United States. She's an orphan. She lives with a rather mean-spirited auntie. She's got a dog called Yuri. She's absolutely space and science fiction kind of like mad. She wants to kind of get out of the situation that she's in, and you know, this incident that happens where a flying saucer crash lands on a farmland seems to be just the opportunity she's kind of like looking for to kind of, you know, explore the wider world and get out from the situation that she is in. So that's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's a common setup, but it's kind of not an unfamiliar setup in kind of children's book. You know, a child looking for something to kind of escape the bad situation that they're in. How did you feel about how kind of David built the world in which the story was kind of set up, and you had the choice of making it in like the 1950s and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly because he wanted to make it set in this kind of space race time. You have Americans against Russians thing. I think maybe it's connected to the fact that like he'll have had a lot more experience of Cold War tensions kind of things than I will have, and that the kids of the age that he's pitching this at will have. So that's maybe a bit of an odd thing. And then, a bit like you say, it's a British writer, but with this very American set thing, and the accents are kind of like comically American, whether that's on purpose or not. It's like very overdone, and yet it doesn't seem like that's played on, really. It kind of feels like it was a very straight decision to set it there, and yet it's been done in a more comical caricature kind of way. A bit weird. I kind of struggled to get into it, and didn't exactly feel like there was a ton of world building in the sense that it made me feel connected to the setting or invested in it or anything like that. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I felt I kind of understood why, he wanted to kind of tell a space exploration story maybe, and, the 1950s where there is this rivalry between, Russia and the United States, and that's a theme that kind of plays a little bit later on in the book in terms of, NASA and, stuff like that coming to the book, and especially kind of towards the end. That does seem like a logical decision to make, to kind of set it during that era, especially, and when you set it during that era, it also allows you to play with that around with the fact that people knew a lot less back then about space than we do perhaps now, which allows them to kind of get away with some of the sillier aspects of some of the decisions that some of the adults make in the book as well. So I think it was a little bit strange. I mean, especially the character of the president, because that's obviously referring to a very modern day president with orange skin. So I felt that was a bit of a odd decision to take that, very kind of modern character and placing him into this world in the, kind of like the 1950s.
And I thought interesting on that in the sense that, as you say, there seemed to be some references in the writing that were very pointed, and yet I feel like they hid away from it a little bit because that wasn't an aspect of the performance for that character's dialogue. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it felt a bit like half of the book was trying to be really topical and pointed, and half of the book was trying to deny, plausible deniability kind of thing. Yeah.
And kind of slightly building on that, one of the other themes that they doesn't really develop that much is kind of the fact that Ruth's hero is Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, and he's a Russian, and his nationality is irrelevant to her. It's just the fact that he's this person that went on and achieved this amazing thing. And there is a section later on where her patriotism is questioned about that, and she's questioned, "Oh, are you a Russian sympathizer?" and stuff like that. She's like, "No, I'm just a massive fan of space, and it doesn't, nationalities don't really matter to me that much. I'm kind of interested in human achievement, and I think men or women and men can just achieve many of the same things." And I felt that might have been a stronger. I wish he'd kind of developed that theme a little bit more.
And I think this is what was kind of in my brain when I said before about the whole kind of like him being closer to Cold War sentiment than we necessarily are now. Obviously, there are now definitely huge tensions with Russia and things that are going on there, but I do think that there was a much more anti-Russian sentiment in that kind of tied to patriotism kind of way during that time. And if you're from America, where I guess it maybe he didn't feel the need to expand on it because to him it feels very obvious and very definite. Whereas actually, if you strip that back from it, it's you don't take that so much for granted. And as you say, that could have been an interesting thing to take further.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, like, for me, the story didn't really grab me. I just thought there's a little bit more potential I felt that everything was very, like, surface level, silly. I don't think there was kind of, like, deeper message that there's a potential to develop that in a story. A story like this that he didn't really go into, even if it's kind of surface level silliness, you can still kind of build those themes in.
Oh, definitely.
Especially with a book, this long, it's kind of 4 hours long. I thought we could have developed that a little bit more. I would say, I mean, I can kind of understand why it is on the shortlist because the sound design I do think is among the best that we've kind of had on the shortlist so far. So I can kind of see why it's there for that kind of reason alone, and kind of David's performance as well. But just purely based on the story, I don't want to say it doesn't merit its inclusion, but it's just that for me, it didn't grab me the way that some of the other books did.
Yeah, no, totally. And I do think, David Walliams gets compared a lot to kind of Roald Dahl, and you can see the influences in there, as you said, the, nasty adult looking after them and child wants to escape in a mystical, magical way, very Roald Dahl. The, meeting the president and saving people, it's, being able to have this amazing plan even as just a little girl feels very kind of BFG. Sophie goes to the Queen and saves from the giants. You can see the influences, but to me, that's what this book felt like. It felt like you could see influences from a lot of other things. You could see stories and tropes and ideas that have been used a lot, and yes, they've been used to make something new, but unfortunately it wasn't particularly exciting. And I don't like giving negative reviews, and especially not in times like this when we're supporting a shortlist and we've been gifted these review copies and we want to be promoting all the books on the list. But unfortunately, just it didn't really grab me, and as I say, I might have been slightly prejudiced against David Walliams anyway, not being the biggest fan of his work and going into it negatively, but I wished it had won me over and it didn't really. But yes, as you say, sound design certainly very expertly done, very cleverly done, a lot thrown at it, not really to my style, but you've got to applaud that it is very good and it is an audio experience. And I'd certainly say that, if you are wanting to or needing to engage with this story, then go for the audio. It's got a lot going for it. It's an exciting experience in that sense of the adaptation and the sound effects, as opposed to kind of reading it. I certainly think I would have struggled just getting through this reading it. Yeah,
so I'd kind of agree with that. I don't think I've got any other point. I mean, I basically agree with what you've said there. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from reading it, but I'd struggle to recommend it as well. So cool. Should we move on to Real Pigeons?
Yeah, so Real Pigeons, audiobooks 1 to 3 by Andrew McDonald and Ben Wood, narrated by Tom Alexander. Ever wonder why pigeons always act so weird? It's because they're out there chasing the bad guys and saving your butts. Did you know your city is protected by a secret squad of crime-fighting pigeons? It's true! With Master of Disguise Rock Pigeon, bendy Tumbler, strong Frillback, and super finder Homey, the Real Pigeons will solve any mystery and fight any bad guy to keep the city safe. So what do Real Pigeons do? They eat danger, of course. This squad of crime-fighting feathered friends is non-stop action and non-stop laughs. In their second silly adventure, watch as they infiltrate a secret warehouse full of bottle birds and take down a truly criminal ostrich. The danger is real, and so are the pigeons. I think that's kind of the blurbs from book 1 and book 2. We've not got the blurb for book 3 there as part of the audiobook blurb. But that gives you a good taste of the pigeons.
So I think we need to kind of give a quick notice here. Rebecca Fortain, who's a friend of the podcast, was one of the people that produced this. So I think it's probably good to just mention that, just to kind of keep it clear that there is a slight connection to the people that produced the book and to us. She was one of the first guests we had on the podcast. So I think it's just better to kind of put that out there at the start. One of the first things I want to say about the audiobook is that the introduction music goes unnecessarily hard. It's kind of unnecessarily epic. It's so extra. I was just kind of oh, what's this? This is kind of this really epic music that kind of introduces us to this ultimately very silly, in the very best way, and very enjoyable and very funny kind of audio experience. So I just wanted kind of that's kind of my initial impressions. What were your first thoughts when you started listening?
Yeah, so that's very fair, and because it's then followed by the very extra over-the-top narration.
Yes.
And it is a style that I've been trying to pin down a description of and been practicing my imitation of, and I don't think I'm going to do because it never came out the way I wanted it to. But it's sort of like movie trailer sort of voice, or like how you imagine a poster would speak. All these different ways. It's very I'm not going to try it. I don't know. I'll do a bit of did you know your city is protected by a secret squad of crime-fighting pigeons? It's true! Yeah. It's like that the entire time. Which, you kind of saying about extra and over the top and going quite hard, it is that, right? Because that, for such a prolonged period of time, for all of the narration parts, is a lot. Yeah. And certainly at the start, kind of, it rubbed me up the wrong way a little bit. I got a lot more into it as it went, and I even found with reading this blurb out before, trying to read it not in such an exaggerated style actually became quite difficult for me. So I can totally see why they did that. And like I say, it really did grow on me. But my first thought was like, this is too much. I need this to be slightly calmer. And interesting because, Tom Alexander, it's clearly not just like the way he speaks or the only voice he can do, right? Because his characters, incredible. Such different voices, different accents, every one of them, and there are a lot of characters in this, a lot of different villains that you meet across the 3 different books, and, you know, multiple stories within those books, as well as all the squad of the Real Pigeons. There are so many different characters, and he does them all absolutely distinctly and so impressively. So it was therefore definitely a choice for him to use this voice for the narration as opposed to it just being his voice. And it's an interesting one. Maybe slightly too much for me, but I think it's nice how it does really, hype everything up, egg everything up and enhance that silliness kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the way he narrates is absolutely straight down the line. He's taking what's happening in the book very, very seriously. Because when we say over the top, sometimes that might imply that they're not taking the material seriously. They're kind of like making fun. He, treats what's happening in the book very, very straight down the line. Kind of the best comparison I could make is probably if anyone's ever watched the original TV series of the Powerpuff Girls, and they've got a narrator in that, and he's kind of like, in the town of Townsville. That's that's kind of like the sort of thing that you can kind of expect to hear. And I would completely agree with what you've just said about the variety of different characters he does and the different accents. This must have been he must have put so much effort into kind of preparing for this role, because this is not something that you could do off the top of your head.
No,
I don't think. I think it must have been kind of quite carefully planned and produced, because again, this also has like sound effects and musical flourishes as well. So I'd agree with you. The quality of the narration is like top notch.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. So good. And it must have had, this character is like this is what their voice is going to be like. These are all the things. Must have definitely read it through to get all that, especially because, it's 3 books worth of, character development and stuff like that. And you wouldn't want to get to book 3 and then find out there's something specific about that character that you didn't do at the start and stuff like that. So definitely all really well planned out and really well done. Kind of connected to that, a great bit at the end that explains like the real pigeons that inspired the characters, and the different species of pigeon, and also just different species of animals that you come across in here, and how they are connected with the pigeon powers, or with their backstory, or with their names, or all those different things are actual real life examples from nature, which is really cool. So another thing where all these things are tied together, you get little drops of detail in there later on that was so well thought out and clever. And even if you don't, know them because you don't know your birds that well, you then hear about them later and go, that was clever. And now I know a bit more. So that was really cool.
I think kind of the clearest possible example of that is there's one of the supervillains, maybe just bird villains.
Supervillains, go on.
So one of the supervillains in the series is an ostrich that eats rocks.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is this ostrich eating rocks for? What's up with that? And then they actually explain, ostriches, they eat rocks to kind of help them digest their food and stuff like that. So it's kind of, it does, there is a bit of like educational information in there as well. I just want to touch a little bit on like the humor. So in the blurb, they kind of mention comparisons to like Dogman and Captain Underpants. And I think that very much is in line. I'd kind of also maybe mention things like asterisks as well, in terms of like, there's a lot of like, not necessarily puns and plays on word, but it's kind of very kind of like quick-witted kind of exchanges of like dialogue between the characters, and kind of like jokes kind of build up on top of each other all the time. So I really enjoyed that kind of like tone that it set. It really does, because I think from what I gathered, this was kind of like maybe not like a graphic novel series, but a very like heavily illustrated book, and I think that really does come across in the audio. You can kind of get that sense of like hectic energy coming through the audio as well. So which is, I imagine, must be kind of like quite difficult to adapt.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I thought it was really, really great that I made the same kind of notes as you. So the like parts where you can tell it will have been an illustration with a caption or an illustration with a speech bubble or something like that in the book, are done slightly differently. I think it's kind of like, it's a bit quieter, maybe someone's a bit further away from the mic, and that kind of distinguished those parts that are supplementary to the story rather than being an example of what's being said as dialogue right now. And I thought that distinction was really good. And the kind of first stint of listening to it, I was like, yes, definitely this. A different stint, I didn't have headphones in and was listening to it just out on my phone speaker, and actually on those parts it went a bit too quiet and I couldn't end up hearing. And I think you'd have the same kind of thing like you've been talking about, listening on the tube, right? You have it set at a certain volume level, and then if it drops below that you might not have heard it, you'd have to rewind it, kind of thing. So that one's a bit of a, it has pros and cons to it. I thought it was really, really effective as you're listening to it to kind of bring out those extra illustration-y bits. So glad they weren't just cut. Some boring people could easily just cut those out, and I'm really glad they weren't. I'm really glad they were put in there and that they were treated slightly differently to give that distinction in the audio. But then, yes, potentially it might make it difficult in some, circumstances when you're listening to it. Also, like you mentioned, kind of like the different characters all talking at once, and that was great. You very clearly had Tom reading the lines in every character voice, and then they've layered them over the top in post. Absolutely brilliant, works so well, fantastic. So yeah, all those kind of decisions were really good. On kind of adaptation again as well, you had kind of, keep listening in there and things like that, making it really audio that was so good. So yes, Rebecca Fortain, as you said, a guest on the podcast and credited with the adaptation for this, done a fabulous job there, I think, and the producer as well on it, recording and post, absolutely fantastic. I thought as well, kind of linked to that keep listening part, there was some really fun parts. Clearly a lot of this I think was in the original books, given that the books were like 3 stories per book, and it has kind of a to be continued right now, which I thought was fantastic. And then what I was hoping they'd do, and then they did, is the fact that because this is a bind up, the kind of to be continued at the end of a book then had a similar kind of treatment for the next bit. So there was like, and by soon I mean right now, that I think was at one of those ones, and the keep listening kind of thing. So I love how they did that. I love how it didn't just feel like it was a bundle for the sake of it being a bundle, for the sake of it being, a longer runtime and more value for money. You're buying it in audio, and the value for money in the production of it and all that kind of jazz. But it was actually like treated as this volume is together as one volume for a reason. That was really good, and the stories carry on like that anyway, like they do naturally just in the way it's written. But that's why it's so fun to listen to all 3 of those books together.
I think that is like the main word that I'll use. Listening to this was just a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it was really enjoyable. So it was a lot of fun. I giggled at some bits, kind of groaned at some of the jokes that were a little bit. Oh, okay, that's you've made that gag. I guess, but I can just imagine kind of younger listeners getting an absolute blast out of listening to this, kind of at a bath time or over the weekend or something. It's just really well put together. I loved a lot of the characters, kind of like Rock Pigeon, this kind of very kind of like earnest, kind of adventurous person that wants to really do the best by his mates and do good in the world and stuff like that. Homey being this kind of like beach bum dude that's kind of like very laid back, just interested in kind of eating breadcrumbs. Tumbler and Frillback, and what's the name of the pigeon that kind of recruits Rock? What's his name?
Graham Powter.
Graham Powter. Yeah, so is his kind of like character of like a maybe a slightly darker history of some of the bad guys in the book as well. I thought was like kind of quite interesting too. Might be a bit of a silly question. Which one of the villains that we encountered was your favourite?
Oh man, you're not giving me a lot of time to think about that. That is a good question. I think that the one that I'm not necessarily going to name because it's a bit of a twist, but there's one that causes a lot of trouble with trying to split them up and with wanting to get rid of and destroy the Real Pigeons and take them over and be the only crime fighter.
Yeah.
I think that was probably my favourite.
I think that's a very, very strong choice. I think, my one's a bit of a spoiler as well. Yeah, there is a lot of like surprising amount of treachery.
So much. And like, this is part of what I said with the kind of like the run on stories, or at least I think it connects with that. And it connects with the intensity we were saying about with the music and with the narration, is that it's quick, like story after story after story after connected story. And there's a new villain and there's a different villain. And then someone turns out to be a villain who wasn't a villain before. But who's this villain? And like, there's so much going on. It's so fast paced. Even if some of the things are kind of repeated, like, I think in this series already made a comparison with Scooby-Doo, but I think, there's kind of a who's this masked villain, and then next week it's again who's this masked villain. There's a bit of repetitiveness, but not in a way that I think you dislike. I think it's almost kind of a parody thing. It's like a paying homage to those kind of superhero-y, mystery, adventure-y stories that have, these tropes of there's double crosses and there's disguises and all that it's just bundling them all into one string of chaotic stories. That's, just really, really fun. Yeah. And I totally agree with you about being fun. This is an absolutely fun audiobook with you giving kind of comp titles, comparisons. A very obvious one to me is Dave Pigeon, which is a book that I read when I was volunteering at Seven Stories, the Children's Book Museum in Newcastle, which is fabulous. Will always recommend. And I was reading a lot of books as part of that, and there were only 2 books from that I loved so much that I went and bought a copy, and Dave Pigeon was one of them. And until I believe May this year, they weren't in audio. And I was really interested to listen because, like you said with this one, there's a lot of like illustrative stuff of how are they going to adapt that to audio that I thought would be really cool. And I haven't listened to them yet, but I'm excited to. But certainly I can say hand on heart that all the books, because I've read the rest of them in the series now, are brilliant. And so I was nervous listening to this, being like, that comparison's going to be in my head. It's going to have to live up to Dave Pigeon. And I don't think anything ever can, because I love it so much. But this did a much better job than I feared it would. I thought it would pale in comparison and be a budget version, but it's genuinely really good. It does a lot of the same things you were saying about puns in it, and the, pigeons love crumbs and cats are scary. There's a lot of comparisons between the two. But I think you don't necessarily need to see that as a bad thing. I really think if you enjoy one, you'll enjoy the other. So I think it's a recommendation for either camp. If you've liked one, go and check out the other, because they're very similar and very good at what they do. So this was really, really fun. And like I say, I went into it worried, thinking that it wouldn't be so good, and I genuinely came out of it really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm quite a big fan of these books now. So so I think I'd kind of agree with that as well. Yeah, so I've out of the 2 books that we've kind of talked about, I think this by far is probably our favourite of the 2. And I think it's a really strong contender in the shortlist. Like Tom's narration, I think he's done such a difficult job what he's done here.
It's absolutely amazing. Yeah, I was blown away. And it's one of those ones where you listen to it and you think, this can't just be one person, and that's just what an amazing narrator that he can do that. So good. Also, a slight thing on that, was it just me, or did you also think that Homey's dad Homer sounded just a little bit Homer Simpson-esque?
Just a little bit.
I felt like there was some nice inspiration and kind of a nod to in that I thought was funny that you don't get in the print version. I don't know, unless maybe he's drawn to look similar.
Pigeon drawn like Homer Simpson, maybe. I don't know. You could kind of see how that was. The only maybe slight criticism, and this is a very, very finicky criticism I've maybe got, is some of the characters are female pigeons, and I didn't necessarily get a strong female kind of like impression.
So I think this is interesting because, I get you. There was certainly one, I think it was Tumbler the Scouse Pigeon, that when she was speaking and then I heard her or she, I was a bit surprised initially. Yeah. And not because it was a Scouse accent, but just the voice that he'd given it. But then I actually was like, you know what? I quite like it. I quite like that Tom just gave a voice to these characters, and he didn't go and try and over-feminize them. That might have made them, if he goes higher pitch, it might have made them more annoying. If he was putting on a kind of traditionally little girl voice or something like that, him as a male performer. And I kind of like that he didn't. And, obviously females all talk and sound differently, and people using she, her pronouns all talk and sound differently. And so although it surprised me, I kind of took a step back and checked myself and was like, yeah, but you shouldn't be seeing that as a criticism kind of thing. That, I love the voices that they used and felt they suited the characters really well.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely the main point. All the voices suited the characters down to T. It's just that's very kind of minor, minor picky thing, because otherwise, it's virtually faultless, really. Yeah. So cool. So I think we kind of been waxing lyrical about Real Pigeons for quite a long time now. I would firmly recommend this. I think it's a brilliant audiobook.
Yeah.
Firmly deserves to be kind of on the shortlist, and I think it's a very, very strong contender. I don't know if you've got any other points you wanted to discuss or any closing thoughts.
Not necessarily, no. I'm glad you loved it as well. Yeah, I was nervous with, comparisons in my head and with the very intense start. But yeah, once I finished it, I was like, yeah, that was incredible, and I loved it, and I'll definitely be recommending that. So yeah, really good.
Cool. Okay, guys, thank you very much for listening. That's the last in our series of special on the shortlist for the Week Junior Book Awards. Once again, thank you to the people responsible for the awards for getting in touch with us and giving us review copies. The winners will be announced on the 2nd of October, so keep your eyes and ears open for the announcement of the winner. I think it's a very tight shortlist. I wouldn't. It's such a very short list as well. It'd be really tricky to pick a winner out of the books that we've listened to. Once again, thank you for listening to the podcast. You can continue to support the podcast by leaving a tip in our tip jar, by leaving a rating or review wherever you've listened to this episode. If you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, that would be great as well. If you want to get in touch, you can get in touch with us on social media. We're at AudioBookishPod just about everywhere, or you can email us at audiobookishpod@gmail.com. Okay, thank you guys. Let's say bye.
Bye.